Today's daf we're going to be learning is Menachot daf tzad design. Today's daf is sponsored by David and Mitzi Geffen in loving memory of David's father, Dr. Avram Geffen, on his 11th year at site. The youngest of the 8 children of Rav Tuvia and Sarah Hannah Geffen, he was devoted to his wife Ethel, parents, siblings, children, extended family, and synagogue community in Beth El and New Rochelle. He was a dedicated physician at Beth Israel Hospital in New York for decades. Okay, we're going to get started with where we left off. We were talking about Rabbi Yochanan, who basically said that the Shulchan, the assumption of what he said was that the Shulchan is susceptible to impurity, to which the Gemara said, why would it be susceptible to impurity? It's a wood table that doesn't move, it stays in its place, to which we answered, it must be because what Rish Lakish said. Rish Lakish explained why it's susceptible to impurity, because it actually, right, because wood vessels that aren't meant to move are not susceptible to impurity, but this one actually was moved, okay, without getting into all the details there. Then the Gemara said, well, why do we have to take Rish Lakish? Or why did Rish Lakish say that? Theoretically, it should be because it was covered with gold. And we used a Mishna saying that when things are covered, it goes by what it's covered with, not what it's made of. And therefore, we go by the metal. And metals don't have the same rules as wood, and it would be susceptible to impurity either way. So we then said, well, maybe because there's a difference whether it's nailed down, the covering, or not nailed down, and the gold on the Shulchan wasn't nailed down, and therefore, maybe that's why. But the Gemara then says, if that's what you want to suggest, at the bottom of Tzadi Vavamabeh, V'habayim in Rish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan, didn't Rish Lakish ask Rabbi Yochanan that question? B'tzipoy omed or b'tzipoy she'en omed? Is this referring to if it's tacked on or not? B'shechipat livs of zav, b'shelochipat livs of zav. Do we go by it only if it covers the edges or not if it covers the edges? V'amar lei, Rabbi Yochanan answered him, Lo shnat tzipoy omed, v'lo shnat tzipoy she'en omed, lo shnat chipad livs of zav, v'lo shnat lo chipad livs of zav. No matter what, we always follow what it's covered with. So now we're back to square one, saying why then doesn't it go by the gold? One other suggestion whether they're going to reject before we get to the actual answer. Well, the table was made of atzei shitim, a special wood. Maybe because of that, we'd say this is important, and it's not basically secondary to the covering, and therefore follows wood. But Hani Chala Rish Lakish Ta'amar, this would make sense according to Rish Lakish, who says, Lo shanu ela beklei iksiligagos habaim imedinat hayam. This is true for wood that comes from abroad, that we're going to go by the cover, what it's covered with. But that's if they come from abroad and they're cheaper, they're not so significant. Aval, clay mismas, chashiva velo batle. But clay mismas, very valuable wood, utensils made of wood, we're actually going to go by the wood. And then, right, they're not considered secondary to the covering. Then Shapir, then we have a great answer. And we say the table was made of atzei shitim, special wood, and because of that, it's considered wood for the laws of impurity. But Ela Rabbi Yochanan, Damar Klei Mismas Nami Badle, but Rabbi Yochanan says, even those kind of vessels, even important ones, they're still considered secondary to the cover. We're going to go by the cover. Ma'yikalamema, what are we going to say? To which the answer, final answer here, Shani Shulchan derachmana karye eitz. It's because the Torah, and we're going to see it's not the Torah, it's in Yechezkel. But in Yechezkel, they call the Shulchan wood. So basically, we're going to go by that. Since it's called wood, even though it's covered in gold, we're going to say, also for the sake of impurity, we're going to call it wood. How do we know this? Shenema, hamizbeach eitz shalosh amot gavoa, or koshtayim amot, umiktzoot lo, or kovit kirotav eitz. So he describes the mizbeach, but we're going to see it's really the shulchan. Okay, it's wood, 3 amot high, its length is 2 amot, and it had corners, right angles, or kovit kirotav eitz, and the length of it and its walls were wood. Vayidaber elai zeh hashulchan asher lifnei Hashem. And he said to me, this is the shulchan, right? Like you saw this image of the shulchan. He said, this is the shulchan that's before God. So now we're going to see it was a shulchan, even though it called it a mizbech. Anyway, the important part here was that they call it eitz, and that's the answer to our question. However, this raises a different question, which is patach b'mizbech v'siyam b'shulchan. Why did they start the verse talking about the mizbech and end the verse talking about the shulchan? Rabbi Yochanan v'Rabbi Elazar de'amri travayu b'zman shebeit hamikdash kayam mizbech mechaper al adam. When the temple is around, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar both say this, when the temple is around, the mizbech is what atones. But now that there's no temple anymore, it's a person's table, meaning how often do you invite guests over? How do you behave at your table, right? You're a judge, basically, and then not only you're a judge, but basically, if you do the right thing, and you invite guests and bring in, help poor people, you end up, it atones for you just like the Mizbeach did. So the Shulchan is like a Mizbeach, and that's the side thing that this teaches. Okay, now we're going to get back to the menorah, to the Shulchan. Okay, and what the Shulchan looked like, we're back to the Mishnah, where it said, and we're still in the menorah, the Shulchan, sorry, getting confused with my terminology. But now we're going to go back to the Shulchan as it's described in the Mishnah. Arba'a snifim shel zahav hayusham. So there were 4 snifim of zahav. If you remember, we discussed this. Okay, we're now going to pull up my screen and we're going to see pictures today. Okay, so again, these are the pictures from the Machon HaMikdash of the snifim. I mentioned previously that it's not always like this. Okay, there's different pictures of what they look like, but basically it's a stand on which it has panels on the side, and the panels, okay, like a pole, I guess you could say, which stands on the ground. Okay, remember we said this is going to look very different if you have the Sfina Rokedet or the Teva Prutza. This one is describing the picture here as if it's a Teva Prutza, and it has panels on the side. Some people, by the way, have them as straight panels. This has like these rectangles going across like strips of panels, 6 of them, okay, on each side. And in each of the 2 sides of the table, if you remember the Ma'arechet, there were 6 and 6. So on each section where there's 6 loaves, there's going to be 2 panels, 1 on each side, with either just 2 straight panels or, like I said, 6. Right? There's 6 panels on each side. Again, these are just all different opinions about what this looked like. Now we want to know, and why are there 4? Because it's a pole with 1 panel, or again, the 6 possible, sections of the panel. On the other side, there's an opposite, the same one. Okay, so that's holding together the 6 loaves, and on the other side of the table is the same thing times 2 again, holding together the other 6 loaves. Where do we get this from? Amar Rav Katina Amar Kras. So Rav Katina says, the pasuk says, okay, it's pasuk in Shmot, V'asita ka'arotav v'chapotav v'kasotav u'menikiotav. So now we have to find what all these things are. Ka'arotav elu tfusim. We talked about that a few days ago, about the tfus, the mold that the bread went into. Kapotav elu bizichin. Okay, for this I have a picture today to show you. The bizichei levona. These are the bowls of frankincense. So here is a picture of the bowls of frankincense that they used. Kasotav, okay, which nobody really knows how to define. Elu snifin. They say that must be the snifin. Umanikiotav elu kanim. Okay, so now we're going to zoom in and see those kanim. We saw them before, but the other thing to point out is that the snifim, if you see here, those panels had little sections that basically, like a hole almost, it looks like here, where the rods that we're going to talk about, these kanim, the rods went into those holes and they were fixed, right? They put them, soon we're going to talk about putting them in and out, but the rods went into those holes. And the rods, again, as we talked about, they were chalul. They were kind of, imagine a long rod, slice it lengthwise, and then you have 2 half rods, kind of, 2 long rods that are halved, and that's the way these rods looked. Okay, so here are the rods. You can zoom in and see them. It's actually the easiest to see them up here. Okay, these are the rods. So now we're going to see, Asher Yusach Behem, that's the end of the pasuk, Shemesachachim Behem et halechem, the rods covered the bread, because they went kind of under the loaves, but also on top of the ones below it. Motiv Rava. Now Rava has a question. So by the way, here we're going to see there are 3 rods under each loaf of bread. Now the bottom one, okay, we're going to get to this later, but the bottom bread, the lowest row of bread sits right on the table. There's no rods. And then you have 3 rods above each loaf of bread, okay, and kind of also under each loaf. And only at the top, you're going to have only 2. If you see here, the top row, you only have 2, and we'll get to that soon. But the first thing we have is a question of Rava, motiv Rava. Lo sidor hakanim velo netilatan dochot et Shabbat. Putting these rods in and taking them out. And we're going to learn that they did it every week before they put the bread on and before they took the bread off. And when they put the bread on, they would take the rods out, and that's how they would get the breads out. Now, putting them in and taking them out doesn't override Shabbat, even though When would you do it? Obviously, when you put the bread in and you take the bread out. The problem is that when you do that, it's Shabbat. So how do you do that? So we're going to see. But right now, we're going to learn they're not Doche Shabbat. Now, why is that a difficulty here? Because if you want to say that this halacha is, or not halacha, but the need for them is Doraita, these rods, so why don't they override Shabbat? So, Hadar Amarav, and it should override Shabbat, just like putting the breads on, so taking in and out the rods. Now, what's the Isur here? So there's some debate about it. So Rashi says that it looks like you're building, because it's kind of like putting together a shelf. Okay, so it looks like building. It's not exactly. Well, all the more, it begs the question, all the more reason you should be allowed to do it on Shabbat, because it's only rabbinic, and there's no rabbinic issues in the temple. So there's a whole debate about this. Some people say it's not that there's no rabbinic, you pick and choose a little, but anyway, we're going to get, that's not really an issue, because they're going to reject this entirely and say, oh, Hadar Amarav, Rava said, you know what, this isn't really a question. Laf Milti, Yehuda Amre. Actually, what I said wasn't really such a great question. Ditnan, because it says in the Mishna, Klal Amar Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva gave a principle. Anything you could do before Shabbat doesn't actually override Shabbat. So even though you're allowed to slaughter animals in the temple, if you could do it before Shabbat, which you can't, because you have to slaughter it on the day you sacrifice it, that's why slaughtering overrides Shabbat. But not things you could do before Shabbat. Now, these, you for sure don't need to override Shabbat for this. Why not? Why could you do it before? Well, Tamamai, what's the reason really for the rods, besides holding up the bread, that for some reason the Gemara here doesn't seem to think that's the issue. Diloli apish lechem, that's what we talked about, them being hollowed out because we want air to get through. That's the whole idea. That's why we slice them in half and they're open rods. We want air to get through. So the bread doesn't become moldy. So b'chi ha'shira lo mi'apish. Now, in the amount of time between Friday afternoon and Shabbat day, when they take the breads off, it's not going to get moldy in that short period of time. And from Shabbat, when we put the loaves on until the time Shabbat's over, it's also not going to, the new breads aren't going to get moldy, and therefore it doesn't override Shabbat for that reason. Kidetanya, as we see in a Braita, Ketzad, how would they do the bread? Nefnas be'erev Shabbat v'shomtan. You take out the rods already on erev Shabbat. U'menichan or kosher shulchan, and then you leave them on the length of the table. U'motzei Shabbat nichnas, on Motzei Shabbat you come back in. After Shabbat's over, magbia rosho shel chala, you pick up the head of each chala. U'machnis kaneh tachtea. V'chozer magbia rosho shel chala, machnis kaneh tachtea. You keep picking up the chalas, put the rods in. Pick up, put the rods in. Okay, and that's how you do it. Arba chalot tzrichot shlosha kanim. Now here we get to the numbers. Okay, 4 loaves need. Okay, now let's get back to the picture. Okay, based on what I described before, this is going to be very easy. The bottom loaf doesn't need rods. Okay, and the top loaf has a different number of rods. So basically, 4 middle ones need 3 shlosha kanim, 3 kanim each, 3 rods each. Ha'elyona inat tzricha l'shnayim. The top one only needs 2. Lefisha ein aleha masui, because there's not a lot of weight bearing down on it. Hatachtona inat tzricha kol ikar lefisha munachat al ta'arosh shel shulchan. And the bottom one, like I said, doesn't need rods because it sits on the table. That's the end of that section. Now we're going to move on to Tnanatam. We're going to bring a Mishna in Kelim. Now this Mishna is going to talk about a machloka between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. And what it's really referring back to is the machloka in the Mishnah about what was the length in handbreadths of the Shulchan, and why was there a difference of opinion? And the reason why there's a difference of opinion is there's a big machloka, which we're going to get into, and we're going to get into a whole mathematical calculation of all sorts of things in the temple, which is what amma they use for measuring. And amma is basically from your elbow to the end of your middle finger. Now you can imagine, first of all, different people have different length arms, but it was a measurement that wasn't like a meter or a foot or something like that. But at a certain point, right, they turned it into standard, and they said the standard amma is 6 tfachim, which, by the way, isn't so easy because it's 6 handbreadths, which also were different sizes. But there was a basic standard size of the amma, that's called the amma benonit. But for certain things in the temple, I guess there was a tradition about it, but it was clear that there were some that were 5 handbreadths and not 6. Some amot, some things we measured the amma in 5 handbreadths, not 6. Which means you're going to have a shorter amma. Okay, there were 2 different amma measurements in the temple. One was 5 handbreadths long, one was 6 handbreadths long. So which was used for which? Machloka between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. For this, we can also look at the study guide. Okay, I'm going to flip back a lot today between the study guide and the study guide and the photos. Okay, the pictures that we're going to have. Okay, so now Tananatam, Rabbi Meir Omer. Kol amot shayu b'mikdash benoniot, chutz mimizbach hazahav v'hakeren v'sovev v'yesod. Okay, so he said, all the amot used in the temple, other than a few small exceptions, the golden altar, that's the one that was in the sanctuary, that was much smaller than the big one that we normally talk about. The keren are the corners of the altar. The sovev is the part that goes around the altar. Okay, let me pull up some pictures and we're going to see them right now. Okay, here's a photo. Okay, these pictures again are from Machon HaMikdash. I can't save them on our site, but they are on the YouTube video. So if you look there, today will definitely be a day that looking on the YouTube will be very helpful. So the keren is here at the corner, the top of the altar. Okay, those are the four corners. It's the part that juts up 1 cubit of height. The sovev is the part, if you remember, you can go up the ramp and get to the top of the altar, but you can also go up the ramp. I'm going to pull up a different picture. You can also go up the ramp of the altar. On the right of it, there's a ramp that goes to a lower height, and that goes to 6 cubits of height off the ground, as opposed to the top of the altar is 10 cubits of height off the ground, and you can walk around the sovev. Okay, so if you're here, you can go on this ramp and walk around. Okay, and that takes you on the sovev. And there were certain korbanot they did there. We'll see some later today. And the yesod. Okay, what's the yesod? The yesod, if you remember, was the base of the altar, okay, on 2 sides only, on the north side and on the west side, the one that was near the exit of the sanctuary, had a base at the bottom. This is where they poured the extra blood. Remember, here's the yesod coming out at the bottom of this picture. Okay, that thing is the yesod. Okay, so the yesod also was measured, okay, it was measured in the 5, okay, these are going to be 5 handbreadths cubits, okay? So, these are the 4 exceptions. Mizbach hazahav, keren, sovev, and yesod. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, amat binyan shishat tvachim. All the building, which Rabbi Meir agrees with as well, all the building was 6 tvachim. However, shel kelim chamisha. All the vessels were 5, okay? Now, so he thinks not just the mizbach hazahav, the keren, the sovev, the yesod, everything. Basically, for our purposes, what does that mean? That's the Shulchan. Okay, obviously it's the menorah and all those others as well, and the Aron. Okay, but he wants to say and the big mizbech, but he wants to say the Shulchan as well. Okay, that's why we're bringing it here. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, the Shulchan was 5 tvachim amas, and that's why it's going to come out right 5 tvachim, 5 handbreadths cubits. That's why the size is going to be smaller. And Rabbi Meir says no, it wasn't one of those exceptions to the rule. It was 6, so it was bigger. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan comes and says, "Ushneim mikra chad darshu." They both darshan the same pasuk. Ve'ela midot hamizbeach. It's here on the sheet as well. It's Yechezkel chapter 43. These are the midot of the mizbeach ba'amot. Okay, in cubits. Ama v'tofach. So the mizbeach was measured in an ama that was an ama and a tofach, which means an ama and a tefach, meaning an ama plus 1 handbreadth. That means it was 5 cubits plus 1. That would make it 6. So the mizbeach measurements were in 6 cubit amas. Turning now to Amabet, v'chek ha'ama v'ama rocha v'gvula al-sfata saviv zeret ha'echan v'zeh gav ha'mizbech. That's a big mouthful. I'm going to have to explain what that means. But basically, both of them understand that there's a switch in the middle of the pasuk then. And it says, but these things were different. They were 5 handbreadth cubits. So, chek ha'ama, now we're going to explain. Zeh yesod. So they both agree about this. The 4 exceptions to the rule right now, according to the simple reading, is chek ha'ama is the yesod, ama rochav zeh sovev, because it was an ama width, so they say that must be the sovev, because it was 1 ama wide that it jutted out from the top part of the mizbeach. Ugvula el sfata sviv hazeret ha'echad elu kranot. Right, this is on the edges, so it makes sense that they're calling it the kranot, the 4 corners. That, again, they're not exactly corners; they're in the corners, and they stick out like horns of the altar. Ze gav hamizbeach, ze mizbach hazahav. So here are your 4 exceptions, which we saw already in Rabbi Meir. Mizbach hazahav, keren, sovev, and yesod. That's exactly what we said. The yesod is chekama, ma'rochav is the sovev, v'ulaz fatasviv zeret ha'echad of the kranot, the horns, and el gav zegav mizbech is the mizbech hazahav, the golden altar that's in the sanctuary. So, what's the machloket then between them? Right, now they're both going to darshan the word zeh. Zeh gav mizbech. Why didn't it just say gav mizbech? Why, in introducing the 4th one exception, does it say zeh? So Rabbi Meir says, Zehu ba'ama bat chamisha. These are the only ones that are in this kind of cubit. Ha-kol amot kelim ba'ama bat shisha. But all other amot of the kelim, all other vessels are shisha. That's Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda savar, kazeh yehu kol amot kelim. Zeh means not this and nothing else. Zeh means like this, all the other vessels are measured. Okay, so that's your machloket between them. Could have stopped here, but now what we really want to understand, we're going to have 3 interpretations. That's what this chart is for. You can already see all the math. It looks complicated. It's actually not so tricky. Okay? Kasal kada'atach miyesod va'ad sovev ba'ama bat chamisha begova. Okay, they thought that the way to read this, okay, is that from the yesod to the sovev, what was measured in 5 cubit amas? 5 handbreadth cubits. When they say cheka ama and ama rochav, which is, again, cheka ama is the yesod, ama rochav is the sovev. The height from, okay, I'm not going to share my chart because I'd rather show you in the pictures, but I recommend that you use the chart to follow. Okay, so let me pull up a picture now. What we want to talk about here is the height from the yesod. The first understanding is that what we're talking about here, when we're talking about measuring, in 5 cubit amas, we're not talking about the width, we're talking about the height. Okay, now the height of the mizbeach was 10 cubits. And from, okay, the yesod was 1 cubit. Okay, let's write this in. The yesod is 1. The next section from above the yesod, after the height of the yesod, is the part that goes up to the sovev is the next part that you'll get to. That's 5 cubits, so altogether 6, right? The height of the sovev is 6 cubits off from the floor. And then you have, 3 cubits. The next section is 3 cubits. That's from the sovev. If you're standing at the sovev and you're looking at the top of the altar, it's 3 more cubits. And then you have the kranot, which is 1. Okay, so altogether that adds up to 10. 1 plus 5 plus 3 plus 1, 10. Now, what they thought originally, the first interpretations, when we're talking about measuring these 5 cubit amas, we're talking about, and then it comes out a little bit strange, but that when you measure the height 10 cubits, it's not exactly the same 10 cubits. The first 6 are in 5 amma, okay? So we have 6 times 5, okay? If you want to know what's the height of the sovev, so you have 6 cubits till you get to the sovev, and there are 5 handbreadths, so it's going to be 30 tvachim. Okay, so the height right here is 30, if you're standing at the top of the sovev. And then, when you do the top 4, if you want to get to the top of the keren, you're going to figure out your amma based on, we have 4 cubits times a 6 cubit amma. Okay, so this is 6 handbreadth cubits. And now you're going to have 4 times 6 is 24. So altogether, what's going to be the height of the altar, according to this? 30 plus 24, which is going to get you to 54. Okay, now let me just give you an example. Right? If it was all 5 cubit ammas, 5 handbreadth cubits, sorry, I keep saying it wrong, 5 handbreadth cubits, then it's going to be 5 times 10 is 50. If you're going to say it's all 6, then it's going to be 60. Okay, this opinion says it was mixed, the way you would measure. Okay, so now let's read. Where did they get this from? Well, my cheka ama va'ama rochav. How do you read those 2 words? Which again, cheka ama meant the yesod, and this meant the sovev. Remember, the yesod is the bottom. The sovev is that middle part of the mizbeach, or a little bit above the middle line. Hachika amar. This is what it means to say. Mi cheka ama va'ad ama rochav ba'ama bat chamisha. What it really meant was not that the sovev is measured like that and the yesod is measured like that, but from the yesod to the sovev, that whole height is measured in 5 cubit ammas. So then, now we're going to read again, we're going to read what I said before. Gova ha-mizbeach kam have, 10 amot. So the height of the mizbeach was 10 cubits. Shit b'nei chamisha chamisha. So 6 were 5 handbreadth cubits. Arba'ah, and 4 of them were b'nei, right? 4 of these were b'nei shita. They were 6 cubit ammas. Mizbeach kam have. So what was the height of the mizbeach? 54. Okay, so far so good. Now I want to remind you this was introduced by Kasakadata, which means, well, people thought. Now here we're going to see what the problem is. So where's the midpoint now? Why is the midpoint important? Remember there was a Chuda Sikra, this red line that went through, you can see in the picture. So that was at the midpoint. So what's the midpoint of 54? 27. Okay, so this line is a 27 height. That's going to be a big problem. Why? So so where's the half point? At 27. Mikhanot va'ad sovev kamahave, from the keren to the sovev. Okay, this is the top part. How much? We already said 24. That's the top part. Kama b'tzir lepalge dimizbeach tlata. Now, how much from? Now, why is 24 important? Because if you're standing on the sovev, okay, which you can't exactly see where it juts out here, but the sovev juts out 1 cubit. You can see it on this side. Okay, where are you standing at that height? You're standing at a height of, or where you're standing 24 from the top. That's the way they're defining it. And you're 3 cubits off from the midpoint, right? Because if you go down 3 more cubits, you get to the midpoint. Utna, now here comes the problem. There's a Mishna that says, Chut shel sikra chogro be'emtza kedei lavdil ben damim ha'elyonim ledamim ha'tachtonim. The Chodesh Sikra was there. Why? To differentiate between blood that's supposed to go at the bottom part of the altar and blood that's supposed to go at the top part. And the truth is that's why you would stand at the sovev, because you want to put the blood. Okay, here's a person. So there's a Kohen standing on this part of the altar. I'm just trying to make a stick person. Not so easy here. But anyway, there's a person standing at this height. And they generally will sprinkle the blood going up. Okay? As opposed to many korbanot, where, like, take where these kohanim are standing. That's usually where the kohanim stand. They're standing at the bottom, and they put right on the bottom part of the altar. Okay? They throw the blood right there. So some bloods are supposed to go on the bottom, some on the top. Okay. So now that's why you have the Chodesh Sikra to know where you're supposed to put it. Now, if the Chodesh Sikra is at 27, we're going to have a problem. Why is that? It doesn't look problematic according to what I've shown. Well, Elahad Tanya, it says in a Braita Gabe Olat HaOf. Now, Olat HaOf, the burnt offering of a bird, is supposed to go on the top part. And it says, Haya'oleba kevesh, so you would go up the ramp like I showed you before. Upana sovev, and you go into the sovev, ubalo lekeren dromit mizrachi. You get to the southeast corner. And the Kohen, and he's standing there. Umoleket roshami mul orpai, he does the malika on the bird by the back of the neck. Umavdil, he separates the head from the body. Umotzeh tamal keren mizbeach, and he squeezes the blood onto the wall of the mizbeach. Okay, so again, like the picture, he's probably standing there doing it up. However, it says, if he bends down and does it going downward, even 1 amma below, it's okay. What's 1 amma? Okay, now he's standing 24 from the top. So if he goes, let's say we even count it as 5 cubit amma, so he goes down another 5. How much is that? 24 plus 5, 29. He's down to 29 away from the top. Now the midline is 27 away from the top. So Hakayav Elyona Lemata Mishnei Tvachim is at least 2 below where he's allowed to be. Why at least? Because it could be, we're talking about, when they say an amma here, maybe they mean a 6-handbreadth amma. And then it would have to be, right, he'd be 30 from the top. So either which way, he's more than 27 from the top, and therefore these numbers don't work. Okay, option 2. Ella. Cheka amma. Okay, so now, right, this is, I just want to show you on the study guide for a minute. Okay, this is our, right, that's all shown in this chart. Okay, now we're going to move on to say, we're not talking about height. When we say 5-handbreadth amma, we're talking about width. Okay, and now we're going to explain. Cheka amma, knisa. Okay, now what do we mean by knisa? We mean how much it's set inward. Okay, how much, so the yesod goes in 1, okay, or also you could say goes out 1. It juts out from the base of the altar by 1. And that 1 is a 5 cubit amma. Amma rochav is knisa. Now the amma rochav is talking about the sovev. And it's talking about, right, so again, we have, it goes out 1 this way, the yesod, the sovev goes out 1, right, from the part that's on top of it. And again, all those 1s are measured as 5-handbreadth cubits. Ugvulal svatasaviv. Knisa, again, that's the keren. Again, how much does it jut out from the, how much does it go outward? It's the width of it. It actually doesn't go outward from anywhere. It's within the walls of the altar. But the point is, it's the width. That's just another way of saying width. Mizbeach kamahavile. Okay, so now let's see if this works with our last numbers. So now, according to this, the height is all 6 handbreadth cubits. So the height is 60. That's easy. 10 times 6 is 60. Palge de mizbech. Kamahave, also easy. 30. Mikranot ad sovev kamahave. What's the top part? That's 24. That's no different because they were anyway 6 handbreadth cubits. From the bottom, okay, kamahave esrim va'arba. So kama batzir the palge de mizbech shisha. So now go down from 30. Another, right, to the Chodesh Sikra. Sorry, I didn't draw that right. Let's go down, right? If you're standing at the Chodesh Sikra and you go down, right, a whole amma. Okay, wait, I didn't say this, right? Oh, sorry, I didn't write this right. Sorry, let me fix this. It's not that the sovev is at a height of, okay, sorry, I did something wrong there. Let me just correct. The Chodesh Sikra is at a height of 30, okay? So, let me just get this right. Okay. The Chodesh Sikra is at a height of, why is it not letting me do it? Here we go. The Chodesh Sikra, that midpoint, is at a height of 30. Now, if you're standing at the top of the sovev, you're 24 from the top, right? You have 24 going up. So if you go down 6, 24 plus 6 equals 30. You're perfect. Perfect. Okay? Now, what's the problem? Well, there's a different problem. Wait a minute, you're talking about the width. How could you say how much it goes in, right, the width of it? It doesn't make any sense because we have another problem. Now, I'm going to pull up a different picture of the Mizbeach, and now we're going to talk about different measurements. If the other ones, if you finally got those down pat, now we're going to talk about the measurements of the base of the altar, and the top of the altar, and where the sovev is, and what all the measurements are. Okay, we're going to see that. Now, if you remember, the yesod juts out. It juts out on two sides. But we're going to imagine it as if it juts out, right? We're going to measure the Mizbeach as a complete square, even though it's not a complete square because the yesod doesn't go out. But as if the yesod went on all four sides, then the Mizbeach would be, Mizbeach hayah 32 al 32. Okay, it's 32. I'm actually going to use black on this one. It'll show up better. 32 by 32. Okay? Now, we're going to see now that, okay, 32 al 32. Allah amma v'kines amma, zeu yesod. We're now going to go through all this. So if you get rid of one amma of the yesod, which basically means you're going to, if you have this whole square, you have to go in one amma on each side because the yesod juts out, right, on two sides. So you're going to have to cut off of the whole base, meaning the base where there is no yesod and the base that's higher than the yesod. Once you're at not anymore at a height of 1 cubit, but you're above that, the base is going to be 30 by 30. Okay, so where this sovev is basically is 30 by 30. Okay, basically this whole wall that I'm writing on is 30 by 30, that square. It's like a square on top of a square on top of a square. That's basically, the bottom one isn't really a square, but imagine as if it's a square. So it's a 30 by 30 square on top of 32 by 32. Now what's the problem? Well, it said go up an amma and go in an amma. Now if going in an amma is, we're going in 5 cubits, because 5 handbreadths, sorry, I keep confusing that, 5 handbreadths and not 6. Now, when we say 32 by 32, we assume we mean 32 by 32. We're measuring the whole Mizbeach. We're assuming we mean by a 6 tfachim, right? Where each amma is 6 tfachim. But if the amma itself is only 5, then you're only going in 5. And then you should have, basically, if you're going to get rid of 2, you're going to end up with 30 with 2 extra tfachim. Because each time, each amma that you've gotten rid of has actually 1 less tefach in it. So that's why they're going to say, 30 u'shnei tfachim havu. It should really be 30 and 2 tfachim, not 30 by 30. V'tu, and if you continue among the measurements in the Mishna, midot, this is midot, where it talks about all the measurements, Allah chamesh v'kanei sama. So go up 5 now, because the height from the yesod until the sovev was 5. Cute, right? Because remember, it was 6 off the ground. 1 was the, right? Then we're up to 5. At the height of 5, you're now going to go in 1, okay? Zeu sovev. Okay, you're going to go in 1 more, and that's the sovev. Okay, so now the square on top of the sovev, where you're going to go up more, is actually a square now of 28 by 28. Now, according to our interpretation, what's going to happen? Well, every 2 amot you move in, we're going to be short a tefach. So now, instead of, right, we were 30 and 2 tfachim, so this should be, nimtza, right, so they say again, nimtza 28 al 28, it's 28 by 28. But it's again, if you say the sovev, the width of it was 1 tefach short of the regular measurement, then this should be 20, right? This should be 28 and 4 tefachim, 4 handbreadths. Now maybe you say, okay, when I said 30 by 30, they said 28 by 28. It's because the difference of the 2 tefachim, the 4 tefachim, that wasn't even a whole tefach, it wasn't worth mentioning. But let's keep going. Mikom kranot amami zeh v'amami zeh. Okay, the kranot take up a space of 1 cubit of each of them. Okay, so now if you take this whole rim and you get rid of it, right? You take the whole rim, if you go around the perimeter of the mizbeach, okay, in fact, I'm going to erase what I just did because I want to show you that already here there's this brown line, okay, this brown square. So if you get rid of the square that's there, okay, you get rid of that outer square, then you're going to go in again 2 more cubits. And what are you going to get to? Of course, they're going to say, right, from here, you're at 26. Second, you're at 26. Trouble doing this. I don't want that. This is what I want. Okay. When you're at that brown square, the brown square is basically 26 by 26. Now at this point, okay, let's just do the math. You're now going to get rid of 2 cubits on this side, 2 cubits on that side, and you're basically going to have, if you get rid of another 2 cubits, you have another differential of 2 handbreadths. So you're going to get, not from 28 and 4 to 28 and 4, instead of getting down to 26 by 26, you're going to be down 2, but plus 2 handbreadths. You're actually going to get to 27. So now you can't say Nisrashim, right? So again, it says there in the Mishna name says from B'shesh Shalaskum B'shesh, but it's from B'sheva Havu. So you can't say, oh, well, it wasn't a whole handbreadth before, so they just rounded it up, or rounded it down actually. But no, this is 27, not 26. That's a whole handbreadth, a whole amma off. Okay? So, lo dak. They said, they just weren't particular about it. Okay, they didn't care it was 1 off. They just left it. Okay, that's not the most convincing, but we're going to have more of a problem that we're not going to be able to get out of. So even if you don't like this answer, don't worry, because we're going to have a bigger problem. Now the space where the kohanim would walk, that's this brown square around that we see. So if you get rid of that, that's again an amma wide. So again, you get rid of 2 ammot. Everything inside, there is a place where you could potentially put the fire on. You see there's all these piles of fire here, right? Piles of wood for fire. That's where you put the piles of wood within the 24 by 24. So the middle square is 24 by 24. Now, according to our numbers, what should it be? Okay, if you get rid of another 2, right? It should be 25. Okay? Now, 25 and some, but okay. Now, at this point it's actually 25. Why? Because at this point we're no longer, before we had the keren, the sovev, and the yesod, they were all 5 cubits, right? 5 handbreadth cubits. Now we're already back to the regular measurements, so this is another full cubit less, but if we were at 27 before, right, this should have been 27, then the inside should be 25 because it's 2 cubits less. Okay, now we're stuck because, again, the number's off. Well, it's no more off than the 27, so they say, maybe you say, they were just saying 24, even though it's really 25, they weren't so careful. But look at this pasuk in Yechezkel. It says, V'Ariel, which is the Mizbeach, it's 12 by 12 as a square. Now, and they say this is the place of the Maracha. Now, that doesn't make any sense. It's 24 by 24, not 12 by 12. Because it really be 12 by 12. It says, well, the 4 corners, right? The 4 quarters. So now, do 4 quarters, and what they're going to say is basically it's the diameter. You're basically going to measure 12 from the center to each side, okay? And therefore, it's clearly 24 by 24 and not 25. So basically, the numbers worked out with the middle of the height of the mizbeach with these new numbers, but it doesn't work out with the length that we are given of the mizbeach, okay? All the different dimensions. So this doesn't work. They're going to try one last thing. Maybe 6 of them. Okay, so now they're going to say, well, maybe the first 6, maybe, okay, now we have to get to a different picture. Okay, let's just pull up the map of the Beit HaMikdash that we've seen before. Okay, so they're going to suggest here, okay, we don't need the picture just yet, but we'll see it in a minute. What they're going to suggest is, maybe when we said you go in the sovev and you go in there and you go in there, maybe the 32 aren't all 6 handbreadth cubits. Maybe of the 32, some are 5 handbreadths. The ones we got rid of that were 5 to begin with were 5 in the measuring also. In other words, when it says you go in one, it means you go in one that was a 5 one. And you go in one that's a 5 one. And you go in one that's a 5 one. Then when you get to the other one, you go in a 6 one. In other words, maybe the measurements all work out like that. And we have different lengths amot that are discussed here. Well, then we're going to have a problem because inken rav chala azara, the azara is not going to be the right length. Okay, because we're going to have a problem, and here we're going to get into measurements of the whole temple courtyard. Ditnan. Kol azara ita orach 187 al rochav 135. The whole, okay, it was 135 width, and the length of the room was 187. Mimizrach lema'arav 187. Okay, from east to west, 187. How do we get to 187? Mekom drusat raglei Yisrael achatis re'ama. Okay, the first section you get into from Shar Nikanor is 11. Then we get to Mekom drusat raglei kohanim, where the kohanim can go. This is 11. Okay, the kohanim can go on the whole thing, but it's just the beginning before they get into where the mizbeach is. Then hamizbeach 32, that takes up 32 in length. Okay, keep going in the room. Bein ulam lemizbeach raglei kohanim achatis re'ama. We have this area between the ulam and the mizbeach. That's 11. Hamizbeach. Sorry, I just read the wrong thing. That's 22. This is 22. Then Haychal Me'ama. Okay, this whole area, okay, including the Chodesh Kodeshim, including the Ulam, is 100. This area behind the kaporet is 11. Okay, this whole thing from here to there. Okay, now, if you add all those up, you're going to get to 187. But if you say that the first 6 cubits that we're going to get rid of are, right, the first 2 of the yesod and the first 2 of the sovev and the first 2 of the keren, you're basically going to be short a whole tefach. And this is actually be 31 amot. And if you obviously can't start measuring and say the 32, the 187, well, one of them was, right, it's minus an amma because some of them were measured by different ones. That's not possible. So this doesn't work at all. And therefore, they're going to suggest, and I'm going to stop here for today, but they're going to give a third suggestion, which is, well, we thought at first, and I'll use the chart just to finish this, we thought at first that it was all about the height. Then we thought it was all about the width. Now we're going to claim that it's gova and rochav. It's both height and width. With that, we'll deal with that in the next class. Okay, a bit of a lot, but we're going to quickly summarize. So what we started with was finishing up this thing about whether it's makabel tuma, right, susceptible to impurity or not, and why we had to say, why we're going by the fact that it's wood and not by the covering, based on another Mishna. Then we went to the arba snifim shel zahav, okay, when we discussed the different parts of the Shulchan and how many items there were and all that. Then we got to the measurements, and we basically talked about the machloket Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir, about which things were amabat chamisha and which were amabat shisha. And then from there we got into how to read that pasuk, how they understood the chek amma, the amma rochav, and what parts exactly were 5. Was it height? Was it width? Or maybe something else. Okay, if you want to review, you can use the chart. And with that, wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom. Recording